Radiation. I wonder what images are rolling through your head right now. Is it a nuclear explosion? Is it a fallout, a radioactive wasteland? Or maybe it's a natural hot spring? Or maybe it's an x-ray machine in a broken bone? Or maybe it's Imagine Dragons. Radioactive! Radioactive! Boom, boom! Radiation seems pretty alien to us in our normal lives. Spare maybe sunscreen. And when we do hear about it, it's usually about something odd or something dangerous. So it makes sense that a lot of people be afraid of it. But how afraid of it should we be exactly? What are the actual dangers? What are the risks of living in, say, the fallout from a nuclear meltdown? Let's cut through the hyperbole and let's look at the science and try to better understand radiation. There are two main concerns we have with radiation exposure: getting a lot all at once, and getting a little over a long period of time. Huge amounts of radiation run the risks of skin lesions, cataracts, radiation sickness, and death. Basically all the worst parts of the Bible. Whereas low levels of radiation, we're mostly worried about cancer. I think people end up mixing up the ideas of an increased likelihood of cancer with the face melting. The problem, if you were to live in Chernobyl today, isn't that you're going to suddenly or instantly die from cancer or some type of face melting. It's that you're going to suffer some type of increased likelihood of developing cancer. So sorry, no superpowers. It's rather kind of boring like that. In the same way that few people die from nicotine overdoses, few people die from radiation overdoses. It's more like smoking or not exercising. It's cumulative and a bit random. Speaking of, I think I need to work out more. A big problem with communicating the risks of living in radiation are we don't have great science for it. We understand pretty well the effects of overdoses of radiation, but for living decades in low levels of radiation, the science is less clear because we've had to rely on observational studies. Why is knowing this so hard? Well, because in this case, the ideal experiment for us would be to take a couple of groups of millions of people with similar living styles and eating habits in similar areas with similar background radiation levels and similar medical histories, and then expose those different groups to different levels of radiation. That's just not going to happen for moral, ethical, and financial reasons. Add that to the problem that observational studies just aren't that good at detecting small effects or establishing causality. What do I mean by that? Well, you can see this played out with health and food science online. Many of the articles that you read are observational studies. A food might be a superfood one year and evil the next. Observational studies can be confounded by a number of different things, like causation problems, bad study design, statistical insignificance, and just plain old bias. These studies aren't worthless, but they can only tell us so much, and that depends a lot on the design of the study. Also, screw kale, all green and tasteless. And so too for radiation. The effects are just so small, and the tools that we have to diagnose the effects are just so limited that there's no way that I can tell you for certain, or even the medical community can tell you for certain, that every bit of radiation is absolutely harmful. There may theoretically be some threshold of low levels of radiation that you don't need to worry about. There might even be some levels of radiation that might be helpful rather than harmful. The evidence just has too big of error bars. I can't tell you for certain. Just like the theoretical positive benefits of kale. Screw kale. The people who develop radiation protection standards assume that every little bit of radiation that you're exposed to is going to increase the likelihood of cancer by just a little bit. Once again, we don't know this for certain. For our discussion, let's assume the worst and just assume that every little bit of radiation that you're exposed to is a tick towards developing cancer. Let's put it in context of other things because I am confused already. How risky is it to live in an evacuation zone for Fukushima? Well, you might be surprised to learn that living in some of the evacuation zones for Fukushima are similar to the health impacts of the air pollution of living in Tokyo. The hell, you say? I'm totally serious. And in fact, there's a great study in BMC Public Health about this. In fact, the study mentions that in some areas that were evacuated, if they went from rural communities to someplace like Kiev, the negative effects of the air pollution of living in Kiev outweighed those effects if they just stayed in Chernobyl. No shit. In fact, in this NASA map of particulate air pollution, all of the areas that are yellow, orange, or greater have health impacts from air pollution that are close to or exceed the impacts of living in mandatory evacuation zones from radiation. And those are just averages. Air pollution levels can change from hour to hour, like when rush hour starts or when the seasons change, from month to month, and those levels can get much higher. In fact, they can get into levels that we would consider for mandatory permanent resettlement if it was radiation instead. So yes, what I am telling you is that large parts of the world are living in areas that have air pollution that are more toxic than living in areas contaminated by a nuclear meltdown. Isn't that a breath of fresh air? I'm not trying to underplay meltdowns here. I'm just trying to say that they aren't the radioactive wastelands that we would assume. This isn't fallout. Please recycle your bottle caps. And in many ways, the wildlife there is doing much better now that humans have left the area. Please see this linky-doo wherever I put it. The short of it is radiation isn't uniquely dangerous. The levels that we're likely to be exposed to, the public health impacts are similar to smoking or being obese or just air pollution, even though I know it doesn't feel like that. Okay, Mr. Smarty Pants, I hear you say, if nuclear meltdowns were just as dangerous as air pollution, then why aren't we evacuating communities for air pollution? Well, that's a great question, viewer, and that'll be subject of part 2 of this 3-part investigation on radio protection standards and why we do what we do. In the next video, we're going to be talking about the ethics of radiological protection. If you felt like this video was a little bit too fast for you and it didn't get the nitty-gritty details that you would like about radiation, that's okay. We're going to be revisiting this topic in the future, so don't you worry. Any questions or comments or concerns that you had about this video, or if you want to join me at my revolution against kale, I definitely want to hear that down below. If you want to follow what I'm going to do on this channel more closely, I'm going to be doing that more on my Facebook, and if you want to just hear me talk about cookies and nuclear power, I'll be doing that more on my Twitter. I look forward to hearing more from you. You'll be hearing more from me. I want to do these more regularly. I'm sorry about the big break between videos. I want to be doing it every month at least, so look forward to the next one. But that's the future. Let's talk about the past, and let's talk about my last video and what you guys thought about the psychology of nuclear power. I just want to thank everybody for the positive comments that you left. You have no idea how much it means to me. It's great. I was actually pretty scared when Hank Green retweeted it that, you know, nuclear power is pretty scary, and when you expose it to a wide group of people, I really just didn't have any idea what to expect. So thank you, thank you, thank you. You guys make this worth doing. And it ended up going over pretty well in my own world, too. It ended up getting shared because there was a meeting of the American Nuclear Society with the American Nuclear Society president at the time, and that opened some doors for me to maybe go and visit nuclear reactors and maybe do some interviews, like a la number file kind of stuff. I really wanted to do interviews with like people that are well educated in this. So we have that to look forward to, and I'm also in talks with some local artists because all of the art and imagery that is nuclear-based is kind of creepy and just not very interesting. So I'm talking with some artists. See Holly's Moving Castle. I'm talking with her, and hopefully she will do some art for us at the end of August. Look for her on Twitter and say, you know, like, thumbs up, you should do this project with me because it would be totally awesome. So go maybe buy some of her art and then and send her this way back to the show. That'd be awesome. A couple of people took issue with something that I just kind of casually said in my last video, specifically Mark Powellick, Todd DeRick, Corey Stansberg, and Jake Kapoor. We're talking about just a one-liner I said about hormesis and bad science, and I hope this video cleared up some of my positions on radiation hormesis and linear no threshold and things like that. It's not that I am saying that hormesis is bad science, but a lot of times people will hold up studies that have the same kind of statistical problems that we have with all epidemiological observational studies that are retrospective and don't have enough sample sizes. I'm going to include lots of links about this and how I've come to my opinion over the course of years. I used to think that you had to believe in radiation hormesis to be a supporter of nuclear power. I don't believe that anymore. I'm basically a model agnostic. I don't believe in linear no threshold or hormesis. I don't think any of them accurately reflect the truth, and I think the truth of radiation and the risks of radiation are better served if we just talk about how low the risks are in general, regardless of the model. So that's the attitude that I have taken, and hopefully I didn't cause you guys too much offense. And like I said, links will be down in the doobly-doo. Brian Batchell has a comment, and he was talking about how I was relating car accidents with a nuclear disaster, and that's not really fair. Like, when you look at a car accident, it's completely different than a nuclear disaster, and trying to compare those two is just not very fair. And I agree to a certain extent. It's all about relative risk, and the problem with using any analogy or any comparison is nothing is exactly like anything else. Like, dying in a plane crash is horrific, and you know, dying in a car accident is bad too, but you know, like careening down to the ground over the course of 7 minutes is just truly horrifying. But even so, we manage to make comparisons and say that air travel is safer mile per mile than car travel. You know, it's hard, and analogies are hard, and comparisons are hard in this space. I didn't mean to offend, but I do think it's a reasonable comparison that we can make between nuclear power and car accidents or anything that cause fatality, even though they don't necessarily kill in the same way. But that was a good point, and I'm glad you brought it up, because I think a lot of people probably thought the same thing. Daniel Oxenhemler mentioned that he's an anti-nuclear person, but looking forward to new videos. I'm glad that you're here. I wish there were more anti-nuclear people, actually, and or at least nuclear skeptical people that are like a little bit on the fence. I don't know about this. All my pro-nuclear friends out there in the audience, don't jump on these guys' throats. They have their reasons for being anti-nuclear, and we would just want to have a conversation anyway. So be respectful, be mindful. It was pretty civil in these last comments, so good job, and let's just keep up the good work. This is awesome. It's good. We're just going to keep on going with that. Brian Nidem and Summer Maniac mentioned that their countries that they live in, like Sweden, Norway, Germany, and different countries, are kind of turning away from nuclear power, but they see other notable scientists and science communicators like Brian Cox and others, like Jim Hansen from NASA, talking good about nuclear power, and they don't really know how to make sense of that. And that's a really good question, and it's a big world, and different people are doing different things with nuclear. You have China that are building reactors like they're going out of style, but then you have other countries like Germany who are closing them down in the wake of Fukushima. It's a complicated answer. I can't pretend to answer it in this little comment response, but I think it's our parents' generation kind of leaving and the young people coming in. And I think young people are a little bit more optimistic about nuclear power and its role to address climate issues because of the great work that our parents have done for things like nuclear proliferation and things like this and nuclear waste. Like, they've established the groundwork for us to solve those problems, but in older generations' minds, those things are still problems, even though their generation worked so hard to solve them. So I think younger people see these solutions and they're like, why are people upset? I don't know if that's the whole reason, but I think that's part of the reason that we see this generation gap in what younger people are feeling towards nuclear power and kind of what established countries with political infighting, what they end up doing with nuclear power. We'll probably go into this more later, though. That was a good question. Thanks for asking it. All right, that wraps it up for me. I'm looking forward to our next conversation. Next one's going to be fun. It's going to be on morals and ethics and radiation. Oh my, it's going to be fun. Looking forward to it, and I'll see you guys next time.